Thank you for choosing Shooting USA on YouTube. This is a new format for us, and we're calling it History's Guns Uncut. Anytime we have a subject matter expert expounding on the virtues of a historical firearm, there is always great content left on the cutting room floor. But thanks to the format of YouTube, we can bring you the full interview. Please enjoy History's Guns Uncut.
So late in the 19th century, Russia was using single-shot Berdan rifles. Well, they got into a war with the Ottoman Empire. Russia took heavy casualties. So that led to a series of trials for a new infantry rifle. So in 1889, Russia had several examples submitted for trials. One was from a Sergei Mosin, another from a Mosin-Nagant. Now, there were others involved, but the trials board was somewhat split between the Mosin design and the Nagant design. Ultimately, the Mosin rifle won, and it became known as the three-line rifle model 1891. Now, the Nagant rifle was considered a 3.5 line rifle. And what those lines represented was tenths of an inch. So the Mosin rifle was a 3-line or 30 caliber rifle, which led to a 7.62 designation. And the Nagant was a 35 caliber rifle, so 3.5 lines. There was actually smaller caliber rifles submitted as well. But Russia decided that the 3-line, 30 caliber was the direction they wanted to go, and Mosin won the contract. Now, everyone knows this as the Mosin-Nagant rifle. That's not how it started off. Officially known as the 3-line rifle model 1891, and later inside of Russia called Mosin's rifle. Well, Nagant didn't much care for that because during the revisions, when the rifle went into production, they borrowed design cues from the different rifles that were submitted. So Nagant actually had a small piece of one of his concepts put into the ultimate production rifle, and he sued the Russian government saying he should have won the contract. Well, ultimately, Russia decided that Nagant's contributions working with the Russian government was significant, and they paid him. Well, the term Mosin-Nagant is the term for the rifle outside of Russia because Nagant himself called it that to the Western press. And that's how we in America and in Europe got to know it as the Mosin-Nagant and not just Mosin's rifle. So the initial design, the Model 91 or M91, featured a hexagonal receiver as it's referred to. That's what most people call it, is the hex receiver. It was a long rifle, much like any of the pre-World War I rifles of the day were. They were all very long, had detachable bayonets that would go over the front sight, twist and lock in place, and the rifle ended up standing roughly 5.5 feet tall with the bayonet. Now, in World War I, trench warfare, everybody's rifle was long. They had fixed bayonets, charged the trenches. Now, later, in, say, World War II, they found that they wanted to have rifles for artillery people, tank crews, supply line people, non-frontline troops. So they made a rifle that was easier to store, carry, and had less effective range. This was basically a defense rifle if their position was being attacked. And this led to the Model 38. Now, it did not have a bayonet because, again, it was basically a defense rifle for their position, not on the front lines. But what they found later in World War II, when fighting became more urban, that led to the Model 44, which did include a bayonet that was permanently attached and could be folded or deployed on the rifle. This particular rifle is a late war example from 1944 where manufacturing techniques corners were cut, the finishes weren't as nice, and they didn't even have enough wood. So they actually substituted laminated wood for the stocks as opposed to solid birch, I believe, is what the original stocks were. One other notable feature of the later rifles is the receivers are now round. Well, the original 91 models were the flat-sided or hex receivers. In 1930, there was an update where they wanted to make improvements to the rifle, and one of those improvements also was to make it easier to manufacture. So they went to a round receiver, and those guns are now the Model 91/30s. Now, some hexagonal receiver guns were reworked with the 1930 updates. So you'll see a mix of 91/30 guns, some with round receivers and some with hexagonal receivers. So the Model 91 first saw action against the Japanese in 1904 when Russia went to war with Japan. Now, there was several million rifles manufactured up to that point, and Russia was pretty happy with it. But at the outbreak of World War I, Russia did not have enough rifles. Their manufacturing was not up to snuff, and they could not produce enough. So they actually reached out to the United States, both to Remington and New England Westinghouse, and ordered over 1 million rifles between those two manufacturers. Well, Remington did produce several 100,000, and so did Westinghouse. They shipped almost 500,000 to Russia and produced roughly 750,000 total before the Soviet Revolution caused disruption and Russia's pullout of World War I. Well, the now Soviet Russia had a new leader called Vladimir Lenin. Well, he decided he wasn't going to pay the United States for the rifles that they had gotten. And that sent both Remington and Westinghouse on the verge of bankruptcy. So to help Remington and Westinghouse out, the United States government decided that they would purchase the remaining just under 300,000 rifles to help make the company solvent again, because after all, we couldn't afford to lose major gun companies in World War I either. So the U.S. made those and marked them as U.S. Rifle Model 1916. They were issued to some friendly countries, and some of them actually went on to fight Russia through other countries. Many of the 1916 U.S. rifles were sold to U.S. civilian market through the Department of Civilian Marksmanship. So there are U.S. marked Mosin-Nagants made by Remington and Westinghouse in the United States, and they're extremely rare and collectible. So keep an eye out for one of those. So yeah, I'd love to have one of those Remington Mosin-Nagants as a piece of history. So the 3-line cartridge that was adopted was a 7.62 millimeter by 54 rimmed. So you can see it has a rim around the cartridge. So it wasn't like the US 30 caliber or 30-06, which was considered a rimless cartridge. It was more like the British Enfield 303, which was a rimmed cartridge at the time. It fed from a fixed 5-round magazine. It would be fed by stripper clips. Through the stripper clip guide, you'd push 5 rounds in and close the bolt. It is a 2-bolt lug, 90-degree throw, much like most every bolt-action rifle. The bolt lugs are on the bolt head versus the bolt body. So in the Mauser designs of the time used a bolt head locking mechanism, but they were a controlled round feed, whereas this is a push feed with a 2-piece bolt, more like the British Enfield rifles, which locked in the rear of the bolt. So Mosin borrowed ideas from several other existing bolt-action rifles that were new technology at the time to produce this rifle. Now, to remove the bolt, you just simply bring it all the way to the back, pull the trigger, and the bolt will remove. Insert it the same way, pull the trigger, it goes in. The bolt handle is attached to the bolt body versus towards the rear of the bolt, whereas the Mauser design and the Enfield design, the bolt handle was back here, so your receiver was fully bridged. The Mosin design was more like the Mannlicher, and it was on the bolt body, so when the bolt comes up, it actually passes through the receiver, and the bolt handle acts as a bolt guide at that point. So to load the rifle, you would open the bolt, insert either a stripper clip, which held 5 rounds, because the magazine was a 5-round internal box magazine, or you could single load them one at a time. So any way you could get rounds in there, it would work. Once it was pushed down, you would simply load and commence firing. Now, the safety, you pull this and rotate it, and that locks your striker to the rear so that the gun will not go off. You have to move the striker back into the firing position to then be able to fire the rifle. Russia was extremely happy with them. It fared well against the Japanese. They used it all through World War I, which of course in World War I everybody had a bolt action, so everything was pretty even. The cartridge was very effective at distance and in energy. Of course, in World War II, the bolt actions started to fall out of favor as countries started developing semi-automatics. But every country still did utilize a bolt action, just some more than others in World War II. Ultimately, Russia produced nearly 20 million Mosin rifles over the course of its lifetime. Now, other countries also adopted the rifle, and Finland actually was in a war with Russia, captured a bunch of Mosins, and started to modify the Mosin to their own liking, and had some of their own variants. And they continued to produce it all the way up into the 70s as target rifles and hunting rifles. And when Russia took the Mosin rifle out of service, they of course went into storage. And any country that was receiving military aid from Russia at the time, like China, a lot of the Middle Eastern countries, Poland, received Mosins as military aid. So these rifles have seen service all over the world with many different countries, and was manufactured by several different countries. Vietnam, China, Afghanistan, Iraq, Egypt, of course Finland. There's quite a few of them, and they say they're still being used in the Ukraine right now. Wow. As resistance rifles. So part of the drama between Mosin and Nagant was the borrowed features of the Nagant rifle that was ultimately used and adopted. And one of those features is the magazine follower spring, how it is attached to the floor plate. Well, Mosin's rifle, it was a separate piece, and it could get lost in field maintenance if someone wasn't paying attention. And this is one of the big key features that Nagant used to sue the Russian government. The other feature was an interrupter, and what that did was prevent double feeding. The Mosin design would double feed sometimes. Well, Mosin had an interrupter designed in his prototype rifle that he submitted, but Mosin was a part of the Russian military, and therefore he couldn't get a patent, and it was treated as military trade secret because it was a new technology. Well, Nagant wasn't even Russian. Well, Nagant, being part of the trial, saw this, went and got an international patent on the concept, and then turned around and used the patent to sue for patent infringement for using someone else's feature on the rifle. The interrupter did evolve. There was 2 different versions of the interrupter, and it was really on the 9130 version where the only feature left of Nagant's was the fixed magazine spring. So just because he had a fixed magazine springs, he got paid 200,000 rubles or whatever money there was there, which was the equal amount to what Mosin got for designing the whole rest of the rifle. It worked out to Russians' favor though, because Nagant continued to submit guns for trials, and ultimately the Nagant revolver was adopted later by the Russian military as a standard issue sidearm.
Thanks again for tuning into the Shooting USA YouTube channel. We hope you enjoyed the content. A couple of notes. Make sure you take advantage of SUSA15 at snapsafe.com. That's our discount code that saves you 15% on anything from SnapSafe, and that gets to be some big money when you start talking about modular safes and vault doors. Also, if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our new content. As always, a like and a comment helps us with that algorithm.